So one thing that I've noticed over the years is how people fall for the tricks and the manipulation of serial killers. Watch any YouTube video of a serial killer talking, and then read the comments. What's one thing that you will always see? A bunch of comments, and these are really the majority of the comments, at least the ones that I have seen, will say things like, oh my goodness, he is so articulate. Oh, he is so calm when he talks. He is charming. I've heard comments like this before. He's charming. He talks in a charming way. He talks in a very intelligent manner. He's so good at having a conversation. He is so fluid in his expression. Goodness gracious. It's hard to imagine this person being a murderer. It's hard to imagine that this person could murder people in such a cold-blooded way. It's hard to imagine that this person is a sadistic serial killer who murdered people, chopped up their bodies. And so it reminds me of something that I am currently reading right now. I'm reading a book called The Death of Punishment, and it's written by a law professor named Robert Blecker, and he specializes on capital punishment, on the death penalty. And he talks about this mass murderer by the name of Daryl Holton. I've talked about him in several of my prior videos. Daryl Holton murdered his 4 children in cold blood. He murdered his 4 children in order to punish his ex-wife. Took his kids to McDonald's, had them play in the playground, watched them as they played, and they all thought that, wow, we're going to spend a few days with daddy. It's so fun, right? They were smiling and laughing and joking. And then he took the kids to the car garage that he worked at because his uncle owned this car garage repair center. It was a car repair garage is what it was. And he lived, worked, and he slept in this garage. He took his kids to the garage, had them play with the power tools because kids love playing with things like that. And then he said, oh, daddy's got a surprise for you. He took the first 2 children to a certain room. Turn around, close your eyes. Daddy's got a surprise for you. Takes out a rifle and shoots and murders both of them. And then he takes the other 2 kids out. And the second pair of children that he took out, one of them was deaf. So he knew that if he killed if he killed the deaf kid, the deaf child, after killing the first 2 children, that the deaf child would not hear the gunshot. So he took advantage of his son's disability. Because the child was deaf, he didn't hear the gunshot. There was no way he was going to hear the gunshot. So he takes the deaf child and the other child, does the same thing, has them turn around, daddy's got a surprise for you, shoots and kills both of them. So he turns himself into the police, and he is sentenced to death because the murder was done with such malice, with such evil and cold-bloodedness that this person, Daryl Holton, obviously deserved capital punishment. His crime was seen as deserving of death. And Daryl Holton had all of these defense lawyers who were coming to defend him because they were against the death penalty, and they were trying to use his case as a way to make a strike, to do a bludgeon, to do damage against capital punishment. And they were trying to make it out that Daryl Holton was both insane and he had a diminished capacity. He did not have the full mental capacity to completely and adequately understand his actions, his murderous actions. And Daryl Holton was trying to plead insanity. That was his appeal, that he was insane. Robert Blecker talks a lot about Daryl Holton. And in fact, he met with Daryl Holton several times. And there was even a long letter correspondence between the two. They would write letters to each other. And of course, Blecker would say, "You deserve death." And Holton would always deflect everything that Blecker would say. So when Blecker would say, hey, I think you deserve death, and this was especially during their actual physical meetings in the prison, Blecker would say, I think you deserve death. And Holton was a very manipulative person, extremely manipulative, more so for the average person to handle. I mean, you're talking about a guy who was so evil that he murdered his own children. This guy has absolutely zero limits as to how much he is willing to lie and to deflect and to bypass morality and to manipulate anyone and lie to anyone to get what he wants or to make a certain person think a certain way. He was a deceiver, to put it in a simple way. And just to give you guys an example as to how manipulative this guy was, in one meeting between Blecker and Holton, Blecker would say, how could you murder your own children yet claim that you love your children? Because Holton would say, of course I love my children. And Blecker would say, well, if you love them, why would you murder them? And Holton would say, well, Mr. Blecker, do you love your children? Yes. Could you tell me why you love your children? And Blecker said, well, I have one daughter who has children already, and my daughter is an extension of myself. And he was trying to explain, Blecker was trying to articulate his love for his daughter, but he couldn't fully do it. He couldn't fully adequately put it into words because it's very difficult to articulate truly what love is. It's kind of like music. Like, what is music? You could say, well, it's a harmony of different notes, but that's just giving a technical explanation. That's just giving a technical framework, but you really can't explain truly what music is. You can only fully experience music in order to have an adequate understanding of it. Or it's kind of like sweetness. If I asked you to explain to me, what is sweetness? Can you define sweetness to me? You would say, well, it's sugary. Well, can you define sugary? You really can't. You really can't articulate what is sweetness or what is sugary. You can only experience sweetness by eating things that are sweet. So it's the same thing with love. You can't, of course, love is a much more profound thing than sugar, but the application is the same. And he couldn't really put into words why he loved his child. He would say, well, my child is an extension of myself, and that's why I love my child. But then Blecker began to stammer on his words. He was having difficulty. And this is a guy who has read tremendous amounts of literature, has taught law for decades. He's a very educated person, but yet here he was stuttering in the presence of this manipulator. He could not fully articulate what was love. He couldn't fully articulate his love for his child. And he admits this in his book that he couldn't fully put it into words. And then Daryl Holton caught that. He got exactly what he wanted, and he said, you see, Mr. Blecker, you can't express your love for your own child. So how could you expect me to express the love that I have for my children? And he was trying to equate the love that he claimed to have had for his children, which was obviously a lie, to Blecker's love for his own child. And this is what Blecker says in his book, that he was trying to equate the two. He was trying to say that Blecker and Holton were, or Blecker and himself were, the same type of person, that they were not that different. Now, even Blecker kind of got caught stammering trying to answer Holton's question. But the way that you deal with such a person is you get right to the facts. You get right to the facts. No, that's a lie. You murdered your children. I did not murder my child. You murdered your children. But you see, he was trying to be manipulative. And he was manipulative. And Holton always gave this impression to Blecker that he wanted to die, that he was stoically willing or stoically accepting of his death sentence, and he was prepared to die. And so Blecker thought, well, maybe there's some repentance. Maybe there's some remorse in this person. But when you read the conversations and the correspondence between Blecker and Holton, not one time does Holton say, I feel bad for what I did. Not one time does Holton say, I have remorse for what I did. He admits that he murdered his children, but he never admits guilt or remorse. He got into legality by saying things like, well, because Blecker would say, well, do you feel that you deserve the death penalty for your crimes? And he says, well, what they have convicted me of is worthy of the death penalty. And that's actually the closest that he ever got to saying that he was deserving of death. But Blecker would push him on it and say, no. Do you feel that what you did, do you feel that your crimes, the crime that you committed, is worthy of capital punishment? To which Holton would say, what they have convicted me of is worthy of the death penalty. And he would just repeat himself. Blecker would push on him. But what you did, is that worthy of death? To which Holton said, you know very well, Mr. Blecker, that conviction and crimes committed are two different things. Basically saying, the court found me guilty, but I'm not going to say that I'm guilty. The court says that I'm worthy of death, but I'm not going to say that I am worthy of death. And here's another little manipulative tactic that Holton would utilize. He would say things like, because Blecker would always tell him, you're worthy of death. Blecker repeatedly told Holton this, you are worthy of death. And Holton would say, Mr. Blecker, I think that your obsession with me dying, I think you should get that checked on. It's kind of a weird obsession. It's a bloodlust. And that's the word that he used. It's a bloodlust. So he would accuse somebody of having a bloodlust, and he would try to make that person feel, he would try to make Blecker feel that he was crazy, that he had an obsession, an unhealthy obsession that really was a bloodlust. So here was a person who accused somebody who wanted justice of having a bloodlust, when the reality was that this guy murdered his 4 children. So the one who murdered his own children is accusing someone who wants justice of having bloodlust. He accused Blecker of what he himself had. But being a manipulator, he deflected, and he tried to turn it against Blecker. He tried to turn it against the one who wanted him to go through the just punishment that he deserved. And it's very interesting. There's a part in the book where Holton talks about how he had this admiration for a capital punishment opponent and a professor of law by the name of James Liebman. James Liebman is still considered to be a top opposer or opponent against the death penalty. And Holton talks about how he read Liebman's 2-volume book on the justice system. So Blecker met with Liebman, and Liebman knew about Holton's case, and Liebman made a 20-minute long video for Holton. He gave the video to Blecker. Blecker gave the video to Holton, and together, Blecker and Holton watched this 20-minute long video recording of Liebman talking. And Liebman said, it's amazing. In the beginning of the video, Liebman is just kissing up to Holton as if he had an admiration for this murderer. Talked about how he respected Holton and how, Holton, you have every right to appeal your case. You have every right to make sure that the government has completely proven that you are guilty. So Holton is watching this 20-minute clip, and there's Blecker, and Holton is just expressionless. He has no expression. He's watching this video. The video ends, and remember, Holton is expected to die very soon. He's expected to die very soon. And just days before his execution, Holton appeals his case. He appeals the death sentencing. And Blecker calls up Holton and says, I thought you said you were willing to die. I thought you said you were ready for your punishment. And Holton says, you don't know what was on my mind. But you told me that you were ready to die and all these things. Well, I didn't tell you everything that was on my mind. And it was kind of like, one of those Southern bless your heart moments. And so what Holton did was his appeal was based off of a disagreement that he had with his defense attorney, with his legal representation. So his legal counsel appealed the case or defended Holton by saying that Holton was both insane and he had diminished capacity. Holton simply wanted to say that he was insane. He did not want to say that he had diminished capacity. The reason for this was because if you say that you have diminished capacity, that means that implies that you still have some capacity, and therefore you understand your actions, and you definitely can be found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. So Holton argued that his defense representation or his legal counsel did not defend him adequately enough. And so he appealed his case. I'm insane. In fact, there was a psychiatrist that came and visited him and interviewed him, or tried to interview him, and Holton didn't say anything, stayed silent the whole time. So the psychiatrist said, "Oh, he's insane. He's quiet all the time. He's crazy. He's a schizoid and he's a narcissist, something like that. He's crazy." Then the government appointed another psychiatrist to do a psychological evaluation of him, and this time the government appointed psychological expert concluded that he was not crazy. This guy is not insane. So they sentenced him to death. But then Holton appealed it, and I think he got like 2 months more he got 2 months more of life. He got 2 months of life more from that appeal. But then eventually they had him executed, and he got the just punishment that he so deserved. But the point that I'm trying to make is how manipulative Holton was. He even convinced Blecker that he was willing to die. In fact, in the book, Blecker admits, I felt manipulated, because he was manipulated. And so why are these people so manipulative, or how are these people so manipulative? Look no more than YouTube comments on any video of a serial killer talking. Go watch Edmund Kemper talking. Go watch Ted Bundy talking. Go watch Charlie Manson talking. Read the comments. You'll see them. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments of people saying, oh, look, he's so articulate. Oh, look, he's so soft-spoken. Oh, look, he's so fluid in his expression. He's so fluid in his articulation. He has such a command over the English language. Oh, wow, it's so hard to imagine this person being a murderer. That's why he was able to kill so many people. That's why people like Kemper were able to kill so many people. It's because he would make you feel safe. He would get your guard down. That's what Holton did with Blecker. Got his guard down. In fact, Blecker talks about how there were certain moments where he felt almost like he had a report and almost that he was on friendly terms with Holton. In the documentary that Blecker was in, it's called I think it's called Robert Blecker Wants Me Dead, I think is the name of it. Go watch it. It's actually very good. Blecker says, a lot of times we're getting a little too comfortable in our conversations with Holton, because the guy was so good at making you feel comfortable that you, in a way, almost as a knee-jerk reaction, you felt safe. You forgot the fact that this man murdered his own children. That's why these people are able to kill, because they get your guard down. They don't come across as the obvious killer that you may have in your own mental conception of things. Look no more. The reality is that a lot of these death row inmates would run circles around the average person. I truly believe that. They would run circles around the average person. And all these people who are like, oh, they may have found Jesus. Oh, they found Christ. Oh, look how many converts you have on death row. Do you really believe that? And are you certain that you can believe that? Because I'm definitely not. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.